The wind up there did not howl like an animal. It spoke like a judge. It came clean off the glaciers and the high empty places where even eagles grew cautious, and it carried with it the thin, brittle smell of old snow, snow that had never melted, never known the insult of spring. Hjalmar stood braced against it with his feet planted on ancient stone and his cloak snapping like a sail gone mad. Each breath was a blade in his throat. Each blink left frost at the edges of his lashes. The world below lay hidden under cloud and distance. Skyrim might have been a rumor told by men who wanted warmth. Up here there was only the mountain and the sky and that wound in the air where time itself had split and never quite healed. He raised the Elder Scroll, and the air fought him for it. The thing did not feel like paper, not truly. It had weight like a shame that could not be confessed, and it vibrated faintly, as though it held its own music and did not care whether mortal ears bled from hearing it. The runes along its surface shifted when he looked directly at them. His eyes wanted to slide away, to pretend this was not happening. The scroll made liars out of eyes. Paarthurnax watched from his crag, motionless as a ruined tower. The old dragon's gaze did not press. It endured. There was no approval in it, and no warning. Only the patience of a creature who had seen empires fall into dust and had learned the great truth of stone. Everything waits. Hjalmar drew the scroll open. The air snapped, and for an instant the world became all sound. The mountain groaned like something waking in pain. Light spilled out, not bright but deep, like the gold under a river. The wind stopped. His cloak fell slack. Snow hung in place, suspended, each flake a tiny star that refused to fall. Then time tilted. He stood on the same stone, and yet not. The sky bruised into a different color. The aurora sharpened into hard green spears. The ridge ahead shimmered, and men took shape there. 3 figures burned into the moment like sword blades held too long in a fire. They were not ghosts, not in the way the Draugr were. They were memory, and memory can be crueler than death. One was a woman with hair like pale wheat and eyes like a winter lake. One was a broad man with the stance of a bear. The last was thin and old, but his posture had the stubbornness of a tree that refused to fall in a storm. They faced the horizon as if daring it to change. And then the sky split open with a roar that was older than language. Alduin came out of the clouds like a judgment given flesh. He was black as char, his wings ragged with battle, his crown of horns cutting the air. When he breathed, the world itself seemed to flinch. The 3 figures did not run. They did not kneel. They opened their mouths, and the mountain answered them. Their shout struck Alduin, and something impossible happened. The great dragon faltered. Not because his body was harmed, but because his mind was forced into a shape it despised. The words were not a spell. They were a wound. Hjalmar felt them in his bones. Mortality, dragged like a chain across divine scales. The idea of ending pressed into Alduin's endlessness until it screamed. Jor, Za, Frol. The syllables tore through Hjalmar's chest. They did not belong to him, and yet they branded him all the same. In that suspended instant, he understood why dragons feared this shout, as men fear plague. It was not strength, it was humiliation. It was being told that even a god could bleed, could fall, could be forgotten. The vision buckled. The air shuddered. Snow began to fall again, too fast, as if it had been held back and now rushed to make up for lost time. Hjalmar staggered, the Elder Scroll snapping shut in his hands like a jaw. He went to one knee. The stone was slick under his glove. His heart hammered hard enough to be heard through the wind. In the space behind his eyes, the shout still rang. It did not ask permission to stay. It was there now, carved into him. Paarthurnax moved at last. The old dragon lowered his head until one vast amber eye was level with the man. The eye reflected Hjalmar's face as a warped thing. Tiny, trembling, stubborn. "You have seen," Paarthurnax rumbled, each word a slow boulder rolling downhill. Hjalmar swallowed blood and cold. "I've learned," he managed. "And what have you learned, Odahviing?" The dragon's voice carried no pride, no triumph. It carried only weight. Hjalmar looked down at the scroll, then at the wound in the air that was still faintly shimmering, still aching like an old scar. "That the end can be hurt," he said, "and that hurting it may not be the same as stopping it." Paarthurnax's nostrils flared. A thin plume of steam drifted out and vanished. "Good," he said softly, and the word was not comfort. It was the sound of a door closing behind them. He did not have long to sit with the taste of revelation. The mountain did not permit quiet truths. It demanded that they be tested in blood and breath. The air changed first. It went taut, as if something enormous had inhaled. The snow stopped smelling clean. A sour note came into it, like old smoke trapped in cloth. Paarthurnax lifted his head, and the spines along his neck rose, not in fear but in readiness. Hjalmar stood, his legs unsteady beneath him. The scroll was strapped again at his side. He wanted to feel its weight, to be certain it had not been a dream. "Call him," Paarthurnax said. Hjalmar's throat was raw from the vision, and the idea of forcing it to speak again felt like tearing stitches open with his own nails. He looked out into the white emptiness and imagined Alduin somewhere beyond it, chewing on the sky as a wolf chews bone. He drew a breath that froze his lungs and opened his mouth. The shout that left him was not elegant. It was the sound of a man hurling a stone at a storm because he had nothing else. The mountain answered. The air shook. Snow lifted from the ridges and spun as if caught in an invisible whirlpool. Then the clouds broke. Alduin came down like night falling all at once. He did not glide. He dropped, his wings beating the air into violence. Lightning crawled over his scales, not because the sky struck him, but because his presence compelled it. His roar slammed into the stone, and the stone held, stubborn as a Nord's pride. Hjalmar's hands went instinctively to his weapon, then stopped. Steel meant nothing to a creature made of ending. He could have brought a fork and fared as well. Alduin's eyes locked onto him. In them there was not merely hatred, but recognition. The cold recognition of a predator realizing the prey has grown teeth. "So," Alduin's voice poured into the world, heavy enough to make the air thicken. "The little mortal who wears my father's gift like a stolen crown." Hjalmar stood his ground. The wind tore at his cloak. His fingers flexed. "I didn't come to talk," he said, though part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted to ask why. Part of him wanted to know if a beast of prophecy could ever answer as a person. Alduin laughed, and it was like hearing a furnace crack. "Mortals never come to talk. You come to beg. You come to die." The dragon lunged. The first rush of heat singed Hjalmar's brows. His skin tightened. He dove aside, boots skidding on ice-slick stone. Where he had stood, the rock blackened and split, steam hissing up like angry spirits. Paarthurnax leapt from his ridge and met Alduin in the air. Their bodies collided with the force of avalanches. Claws raked. Wings beat. Snow exploded upward. For a moment the sky was filled with black scales and white spray, a chaos of ancient muscle and rage. Hjalmar ran, because standing still would have been a kind of suicide dressed as bravery. He ran to a jut of stone that rose like a broken tooth from the ridge, and he planted himself behind it, sucking air. His heart hammered. His mouth tasted of iron. He felt the shout inside him, coiled like a viper. "Chor, sa, frull." He turned and faced Alduin. Alduin had thrown Paarthurnax down. The older dragon struck the stone, slid, regained his footing with a snarl that shook dust from the cliffs. Alduin wheeled above them, shadow passing over the ridge, and opened his jaws for another breath that would have melted men into stories. Hjalmar shouted. Dragonrend ripped out of him, not as three separate words, but as one brutal truth. The air warped. The mountain groaned again, as if offended. Alduin jerked in midair. It was subtle at first. His wings faltered by the width of a heartbeat. Then it hit fully. The great dragon shuddered as though someone had driven a spear through his thoughts. His roar changed. It lost its endlessness. It became, for a terrible instant, an animal sound. He dropped. Alduin struck the ridge hard enough to crack stone. He scrabbled, claws gouging, wings beating uselessly against the weight of a world that suddenly mattered. His eyes were wide, his pupils narrowed like a man staring at a noose. Hjalmar stood over him with his blade in hand. Not because it would kill Alduin, but because men needed props to feel brave. Alduin's head turned, slow, stiff, furious. "You dare," he rasped. The words strangled with something that sounded dangerously close to panic. "I dare," Hjalmar said, and he meant it. He did not know what else he was, if not a dare flung at the sky. Paarthurnax limped to his side, blood-dark ichor staining the snow. The old dragon's breathing was heavy, but his eye stayed sharp. "He will flee," Paarthurnax murmured. "He cannot bear this wound." Hjalmar tightened his grip. For a heartbeat, he imagined driving steel into the soft place under Alduin's jaw. Imagined doing it again and again until something divine broke. It was a childish fantasy. It was also frighteningly satisfying. Alduin's wings heaved. He forced them to work. He shoved against the stone with his claws and rose, shaking, rage boiling off him like heat. "This is not the end," Alduin snarled. "You cannot kill what I am." Hjalmar watched him climb. The shout still held him down in spirit even as his body rose. "Maybe I don't have to," Hjalmar said, more to himself than to the dragon. Alduin's laughter came again, but it was thinner now. "You will try," he promised. And then he flung himself into the cloud and vanished into storm as if he had never been. The wind resumed its ordinary cruelty. Paarthurnax exhaled and his breath came out as steam and blood. "He fears you," the old dragon said. Hjalmar stared into the whiteness where Alduin had disappeared. His shoulders ached with tension he could not release. "He fears dying," he said. Paarthurnax's eye narrowed. "No," he said. "He fears being wrong." Hjalmar did not understand, not fully. Yet the words sank into him like a hook. He felt them catch somewhere deep and tender. The mountain did not cheer. The sky did not open and shower blessings. There was only the cold and the taste of smoke in the snow. And the knowledge that stopping Alduin might require something uglier than killing. High Hrothgar was built for men who wanted to disappear. Its stones drank sound. Even the wind came in muted, like a beast that had learned to fear this place. Hjalmar climbed the steps again, boots thudding dully on ancient wood, and felt as though each stair took him farther from the world of politics and hearth fires, and closer to something that watched without blinking. The Greybeards waited in the great hall where the floor was worn smooth by centuries of bare feet. Candles trembled in their niches. Shadows moved like thoughts that could not be spoken aloud. Arngeir stood at the center, hands folded in his sleeves, his face carved with years and restraint. His eyes flicked to the smear of dark ichor still crusted along Hjalmar's gauntlet. "You have fought him," Arngeir said. Hjalmar nodded. "And he fled. He will return." The statement was not a warning. It was an observation, like noting that winter follows autumn. "The shout works," Hjalmar said. "Dragonrend. It?" He searched for words that would not sound like madness. "It makes him smaller." "Not smaller," Arngeir corrected gently. "Mortal, Dartai." The word landed like a stone in water. Mortal. As if mortality were an ailment you could catch. Hjalmar looked down at his hands. The skin around his knuckles was cracked from cold, the scars old and pale. His body knew what mortal meant. It meant hunger. It meant fatigue. It meant burying friends and pretending the earth was kind enough to hold them gently. "To make a dragon mortal," Hjalmar said slowly, "is to make him capable of fear." Arngeir's mouth tightened, almost a frown. "It is a shout born of hatred," he said. "Of desperation." The ancient tongues did not create Dragonrend to teach a lesson. They created it to break him. "None," Gundia. Bain. Bai. Hjalmar met his gaze. And yet it broke him enough to flee. Arngeir's eyes held his. To flee, he agreed. Not to end. The other Greybeards stood behind him, silent as stone, their faces unreadable. Their stillness made Hjalmar feel loud even when he whispered. Esbern says the wall speaks of defeating Alduin, Hjalmar said. He had heard the words echoed in taverns already. Dragonborn, savior, chosen. Men loved a story that made their fear into something manageable. Delphine says there's only one way to defeat him. Arngeir's fingers flexed under his sleeves. The blades, he said, and there was old disdain in the sound. They have always wanted simple answers. A dragon is a threat must be slain. A man is a tool must be used. Hjalmar felt his jaw tighten. And what do you want? For a moment, Arngeir's composure cracked just enough to show the weight beneath it. We want the world to endure, he said quietly. We want the voice to be more than a weapon. We want you to remember that you are not merely a sword in someone else's hand. Nay. The candles hissed as a draft moved through the hall. Hjalmar listened to it like it might carry a message. I will stop him, Hjalmar said. I swear it. Arngeir inclined his head. That is not the same as what the blades ask. Hjalmar thought of Alduin's eyes when Dragonrend hit. Wide, furious, sick with a sudden knowledge of ending. He thought of the way the dragon had said, You cannot kill what I am. What if? Hjalmar said, voice low. Killing him is exactly what he expects. The hall seemed to tighten around the question. Arngeir studied him for a long time. Prophecy is a road, he said at last. Not a chain. Many footsteps can travel it. Some lead to glory. Some lead to ruin. Hjalmar's breath fogged. And if I choose a different path? Arngeir's gaze did not waver. Then you must be prepared to walk it without approval, he said. Even from those who claim to speak for the gods. Hjalmar swallowed. Even from the gods themselves. Arngeir did not answer. He only stepped back, and the Greybeard's silence swallowed the hall again. Outside, the mountain wind rose, and Hjalmar could not shake the feeling that somewhere, far beyond the clouds, something vast had turned its head to listen. Skyhaven Temple smelled like old oil and older grudges. The air was warmer than High Hrothgar's thin cruelty, but it was not comfort. It was the heat of torches burning in a place that had been sealed away from daylight for centuries. Hjalmar followed the corridor down into the belly of the mountain, while Delphine strode ahead like a woman who had never once doubted herself. Her boots struck the stone with impatient certainty. Esbern shuffled beside Hjalmar, muttering fragments of ancient names and dates under his breath as if repeating them might make them true. They emerged into the chamber where the wall waited. Alduin's wall was not a wall so much as a story hammered into stone by men who had wanted to believe they were writing the ending. It towered above them, carved with dragons and warriors and symbols that made the eye ache. The torchlight made the reliefs look alive. The dragons seemed to shift when the flame flickered, as if the stone remembered being flesh. Esbern went to it with reverence bordering on hunger. There, he breathed, pointing. You see? This is you. This is the Dragonborn. This is the battle. This is everything. Nah. Elish. Gandao. Delphine's gaze stayed on Hjalmar. This is the proof, she said. All the doubt, all the Greybeard nonsense. It's right here. Hjalmar stepped closer, squinting at the carvings. His education had been in steel and snow, not scripture, but even he could see the shape of the tale. The World Eater, the mortal champion, the clash that would decide whether the world continued. He traced a finger along the line of a dragon's wing. The stone was cold, but not as cold as he expected. It almost felt warm, as if it held the memory of a fire long gone. Defeat, Esbern murmured. It says defeat. Not delay, not bargain. Defeat. Delphine's mouth tightened, and we both know what that means. Hjalmar looked over his shoulder at her. You mean kill? She did not flinch. "Yes," she said. "Kill. You've already proven you can hurt him. Finish it." Esbern nodded rapidly. "Alduin is a threat unlike any other. This isn't politics. This isn't some bandit chief you can spare and hope he reforms. This is the end of everything." And Hjalmar felt the pressure of their certainty like hands on his shoulders, trying to push him into a shape that fit their expectations. He had seen men make decisions this way, fast, hard, clean, so they would not have to live with uncertainty. He had also seen the bodies those decisions left behind. "Tell me," Hjalmar said slowly. "What do you know of Alduin beyond what you fear?" Delphine's eyes flashed. "I know he burns towns. I know he resurrects dragons. I know people die when he wants them to." "That's what he does," Hjalmar said. "Not what he is." Esbern made a small, frustrated sound. "He is the World Eater," he said. "It's in the name." "And why is that a name at all?" Hjalmar asked. "Who named him that? Men, afraid, or gods making a point?" Delphine's hand went to the hilt of her sword, not drawing it, but reminding him she could. "Don't start sounding like Arngir," she warned. "The Greybeards would have you sit on a mountain and hum while Skyrim burns." Hjalmar turned back to the wall. He stared at the carved figure that was meant to be him, small against the dragon, yet standing. In the stone, the mortal's weapon was raised, mid-strike, frozen forever at the moment before impact. A thought came to him, unwelcome as a splinter. The wall showed only one ending because it had been carved by men who could imagine only one kind of victory. "What if the ending is wrong?" he said. Esbern's face pinched. "It can't be," he insisted. "It's history. It's prophecy." "It's a carving," Hjalmar said, "made by hands that shook with fear." Delphine took a step closer, so near he could smell the leather oil and sweat on her. "Listen to me," she said, voice low. "You're the Dragonborn. People will follow you into fire because they think you're the answer. Don't turn that into a question." Hjalmar felt something in him go still. "Maybe the question is the answer," he said. Delphine stared at him like he had spoken blasphemy. Esbern opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if words had failed him for the first time in years. Hjalmar turned away from the wall. The torches cast his shadow across the carvings, and for a moment, it looked like the mortal figure in the stone had stepped out and was walking off the story's edge. "I will stop him," Hjalmar said, "but I will not swear to kill something I don't understand." Delphine's jaw clenched. "Then you don't understand what's at stake." Hjalmar paused at the corridor. "I understand death," he said without looking back. "I don't understand endings that call themselves divine." Behind him the wall watched, silent, while the torches hissed and the old temple breathed dust like a sleeping beast. Dragonsreach was built to look down on fear. Its long hall sat above Whiterun like a perched hawk, and its beams were carved with the proud tales of men who believed they could tame the sky. Yet the hall felt smaller now, as if the rumors of dragons had shrunk it. Hjalmar walked the length of the mead-scented room, past braziers that crackled, and guards who tried not to stare too openly at the man who had shouted dragons from the sky. He could feel eyes on him from every bench and alcove. Some were hopeful. Some were hungry. Most were terrified. On the throne sat Balgruf, shoulders squared beneath furs, crown heavy on his brow. The Jarl's face held the weary hardness of a man pulled between duty and doubt. His children were not in the hall. He had sent them away when the dragon attacks began. That absence lay in the room like a missing tooth. Lydia stood near the steps, straight-backed, her expression carefully blank. Only the way her fingers rested on her sword hilt betrayed the strain beneath. She had followed Hjalmar through tombs and blood and politics. She had never asked why. Tonight her eyes did. Balgruf leaned forward. "I hear you brought news from the mountain," he said. Hjalmar bowed his head out of respect more than obedience. "Alduin fled," he said. "He can be forced down." A murmur ran through the hall like wind through grass. A few men smiled, too fast, as if happiness could be grabbed before it escaped. Others crossed themselves, muttering prayers to gods who had been slow to answer. Balgruf raised a hand and the murmurs died. "Forced down," he repeated. "Not killed." Hjalmar felt the weight of the word, the expectation hidden inside it. "Not yet," he said. Balgruf's gaze sharpened. "The Empire says the war must continue," he said. "Ulfric says the Empire must bleed. And in the middle of it all, dragons come from the sky like bad weather. I need more than a not yet." Hjalmar understood. Balgruf had a city to keep alive. He could not afford philosophy. "There is a path to Alduin," Hjalmar said. "But it goes through this war, whether we like it or not. I need a truce, even if it tastes like ash." Balgruf exhaled slowly, as if letting out a breath had held for weeks. "You're asking me to host a peace council," he said, voice low. "Under my roof, with my people watching. Ulfric will call it weakness. Tullius will call it a trap." "No." Hjalmar did not mention that the Greybeards were already offering High Hrothgar as neutral ground. He let Balgruf keep the dignity of being asked. "I'm asking you to be alive next season," Hjalmar said. Balgruf's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite a grimace. "You have a way of making demands sound like mercy," he said. Hjalmar spread his hands. "Dragons don't care whose banner flies over Whiterun," he said. "Alduin doesn't care either. But men do. Men will die for pride while the sky burns." "Nay, Abda?" One of Balgruf's housecarls shifted. "My Jarl," the man said. "We can't trust the Stormcloaks." A voice from another bench snapped back. "And we can't trust the Empire." Balgruf's eyes flicked between them, tired. "Enough," he said, and the hall obeyed because it had learned there were worse sounds than a Jarl's anger, like wings above the rooftops. He looked back at Hjalmar. "If I do this," he said, "if I set the table and tell wolves to sit together, you swear to end this dragon business quickly." Hjalmar felt Lydia's gaze like a blade between his ribs. He thought of Alduin's eyes again, the flash of something that might have been fear. He thought of the wall with its carved certainty. He thought of Arngeir's warning that prophecy was not a chain. "I swear to stop Alduin," Hjalmar said carefully. "That is the best oath I can give you." Balgruf studied him. The Jarl had fought bandits and war and famine. He could read the difference between a lie and a truth that hurt. At last, Balgruf nodded. "Very well," he said. "I'll send word, and may all the gods you're not sure you believe in help you." As Hjalmar turned to leave, Lydia stepped closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "You speak like a man standing on thin ice," she murmured. Hjalmar glanced at her, and for a heartbeat the hall's noise faded. "I am," he admitted. "And you still walk forward." He held her gaze. "If I stop, we all sink." Lydia's expression softened by a fraction, then hardened again into duty. "Then I'll walk with you," she said. Hjalmar left Dragonsreach with the smell of smoke in his hair and the taste of politics on his tongue, and he could not shake the uneasy thought that the war between men was not separate from Alduin at all, but the same hunger wearing a different face. The mountain did not care about empires. It did not care about kings, nor rebels, nor the neat lines men drew across maps to pretend the world could be owned. High Hrothgar had watched the rise and fall of powers long before the Empire's banners ever touched Skyrim's snow. Still, when Ulfric and Tullius walked into the Greybeards' hall, the stone itself seemed to tense. They came with their guards and their pride. Ulfric wore furs like a boast, his beard braided, his eyes bright with the fierce certainty of a man who had decided suffering could be turned into righteousness. Tullius wore his discipline like armor, his posture straight, his mouth set in a line that suggested he had swallowed too many orders and too little joy. Arngeir stood at one end of the hall, hands folded, watching as if he were witnessing a childish quarrel in a sacred place. Hjalmar stood between the two sides like a log thrown across a river. He could feel the current beneath, eager to sweep him away. "This is absurd," Tullius said, voice clipped. We are here because a condition has arisen, not to negotiate away the Emperor's authority. Ulfric's laugh was harsh. Authority, he spat. You mean chains. You mean the Thalmor whispering in your ear while my people choke on your laws. Tullius' eyes narrowed. And you mean the blood on the streets of Solitude, he said. The blood of a king you murdered. Ulfric's hand went to the table, knuckles whitening. Torrig was a boy playing at rule, he snarled. I gave him the chance to prove himself. You killed him with a shout, Tullius snapped. You tore him apart with your voice. The words hit Hjalmar like a slap. In the space of a heartbeat he saw a young king falling, ribs cracking, air punched from lungs by sound made into violence. It was not so different from Dragonrend, forcing a truth onto a body that could not endure it. Ulfric's gaze flicked to Hjalmar. For a heartbeat there was something almost pleading in it, as if Ulfric wanted another voice to justify his own. Then it vanished behind pride. Hjalmar leaned forward. If you want to keep arguing about dead kings, he said, voice calm, do it somewhere else. Alduin doesn't care who sits on a throne. Ulfric's mouth curled. Spoken like someone who's never had to bow, he said. I've bowed to blades, Hjalmar replied. To hunger, to winter. None of them were impressed. Tullius exhaled sharply through his nose. We can't simply stop fighting, he said. There are fronts, supply lines. Then collapse them, Hjalmar said. Silence fell like snow. Arngeir's eyebrows lifted slightly, the only sign of surprise. Ulfric barked a laugh. You think this is a tavern brawl you can call off because you're tired? He demanded. Hjalmar met his eyes. I think it's a house on fire, he said. And you're arguing over whose chair gets moved first. Ulfric's expression darkened, but he did not look away. The rebel king had the look of a man who knew how to hold pain and turn it into fuel. Tullius' gaze shifted, calculating. What are you proposing? He asked finally. Hjalmar laid out the terms he had dragged from a dozen reluctant mouths. Holds exchanged, prisoners returned, boundaries redrawn, and grudges temporarily leashed. Each concession tasted like dirt. Each agreement felt like stitching a wound that everyone knew would reopen. They argued. Of course they argued. Voices rose. Threats simmered. At one point, a stormcloak hand brushed a sword hilt, and an imperial guard shifted, and for a heartbeat Hjalmar was certain the hall would become another battlefield. The Greybeards did nothing. Their stillness was its own kind of threat. In the end, it was not reason that won, but fear. The fear of dragons. The fear of a sky that could decide to kill without warning. Men would accept humiliation if the alternative was annihilation. Ulfric finally leaned back, jaw clenched. A temporary ceasefire, he said, as if saying the words burned his tongue. Until the dragon threat is handled. Tullius nodded curtly. Agreed, he said, and the relief in his voice was so slight it might have been imagined. Hjalmar felt no triumph. He felt only the weight of what he had done, forcing men into peace the way Dragonrend forced a dragon into mortality. Arngeir stepped forward at last. Then it is decided, he said, and his voice filled the hall like the final note of a prayer. May you remember this moment when your pride tempts you to forget why you came. As the leaders stood, Ulfric paused and looked at Hjalmar. You've got the voice, he said quietly, so that only Hjalmar could hear. Don't let them use it to make you their puppet. Hjalmar's mouth tightened. I could say the same to you, he replied. Ulfric's eyes flashed. I'm nobody's puppet, he said. Hjalmar watched him turn away, cloak swirling like storm cloud. He wondered, not for the first time, how many men said that right before the strings tightened. They had built Dragonsreach to hold a dragon once. The old Jarl who raised its beams had done so like a man building a cage for a god, convinced that if the wood was thick enough and the iron strong enough, the sky could be tamed. For centuries the trap had been a story told to children and drunks. Now it was a plan held together by desperation and Hjalmar's will. The hall was cleared of everything not nailed down. The men who remained held their spears like talismans, as if the length of iron could ward off fire. Balgruf stood near his throne with his jaw set. Lydia lingered close to Hjalmar, a steady presence, though her eyes kept flicking upward toward the open roof. Hjalmar could feel the city outside holding its breath. Even through stone, he sensed the fear. People pressed into their homes, hands over children's mouths, prayers whispered into corners. He stepped out onto the balcony, cold winds slapping his face. Above, the sky was a hard winter blue, clean and merciless. He drew a breath and shouted. The call went up like a thrown spear. It struck the air and made it ring. Hjalmar felt the words tear free from his chest and race into the distance, hunting for a creature that heard in language older than men. For a moment there was nothing. Then a shadow slid across the sun. Odahviing came in like a falling star, red scales catching the light, wings beating the air into thunder. He circled once above the hall as if amused, as if savoring the panic below. Then he dropped, talons extended, and landed on the roof beams with a crack that shook dust down in pale sheets. His head dipped into the open space, and his eyes, sharp, intelligent, cruel, fixed on Hjalmar. "You call," Odahviing said, and his voice filled the hall with heat. "I answer, speak, little Dovahkian." Hjalmar met his gaze and forced his hands to remain steady. "I want to know where Alduin went," he said. Odahviing laughed, softly. "To devour," he said. "To feed, to gather those who tremble and think trembling is prayer." The words chilled Hjalmar more than the mountain wind ever had. "Where?" he demanded. Odahviing's eyes narrowed. "Skuldafn," he said at last. "The old place. The door between. He goes there because he thinks it is his right." "Me." Hjalmar's fingers tightened on the balcony rail. Skuldafn, the forbidden temple of the dragon cult, hidden beyond mortal paths. A gate to somewhere else. A gate to Sovngarde if the stories were true. Behind him, a signal. The trap sprang. Chains snapped upward, iron screaming. A massive lattice of metal dropped from above like a net cast by a giant fisherman. Odahviing roared, wings flaring, but the chains wrapped around his body and pinned him. He thrashed, claws gouging the wood, tail smashing benches into splinters. Men screamed. Spears wavered. The dragon's roar hit Hjalmar like a physical blow. The air vibrated. His teeth rattled. Odahviing's eyes burned with fury as he struggled, trapped, humiliated. "You dare," he snarled, the same word Alduin had used. "You dare bind me." Hjalmar stepped forward to the edge of the balcony. He let the dragon see his face clearly. "I dare," he said, and he felt something in him settle into that familiar shape again. The shape of a man who has chosen and will pay for it. Odahviing's lips curled back from teeth like swords. "Then you are either brave," he said, "or foolish beyond measure." "Both," Hjalmar admitted. For a long moment, the only sounds were Odahviing's furious breathing and the creak of chains. Then the dragon's gaze sharpened, turning inward, evaluating. "You seek Alduin," Odahviing said slowly. "To kill him, to claim the right to rule the Dov." Hjalmar felt a strange flicker at the word rule. "I seek him to stop him," he said. Odahviing tilted his head as if tasting the distinction. "Stop," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a joke. "You mortals stop nothing. You only delay, and then you die." "No." Hjalmar leaned closer. "And what do dragons do?" he asked. Odahviing's eyes held his. "We endure," he said simply. "We remember." There it was. The difference that made Dragonrend such a cruelty. Mortals feared endings. Dragons feared forgetting. Hjalmar's voice lowered. "Does Alduin remember why he was made?" he asked. Odahviing's nostrils flared. "Alduin remembers only hunger," he snapped. Then, quieter, almost unwilling. And fear, not of death, of disobedience. Hjalmar felt the words like a cold hand around his heart. Disobedience to whom? He pressed. Odahviing's gaze flicked upward, toward the unseen sky, toward whatever lay behind it. To time, he said. And the word carried a weight that made the hall feel suddenly too small. Hjalmar straightened. He could feel Balgruf watching, waiting for the practical part. You'll take me to Skuldafn, he said. Odahviing snarled. Free me, he demanded. Hjalmar's mouth tightened. Swear, he said. Swear by your name. The dragon's eyes narrowed, then widened slightly in something like grudging respect. You bargain like a dragon, Odahviing said. Very well. I will bear you to Skuldafn. And when you face Alduin, you will remember this. The Dove do not forgive humiliation. Nah. Hjalmar nodded once. Then don't make a habit of being caught, he said. Below, Balgruf let out a breath that sounded like he'd been drowning. Lydia's shoulders loosened by the smallest fraction. The trap held, for now. But Hjalmar could not stop thinking about Odahviing's words. Alduin feared disobedience. Not to men. To time. Odahviing's back was hotter than expected. Even through leather and fur, Hjalmar could feel the dragon's heat bleeding into him. A reminder that dragons were not merely flying beasts, but living furnaces wrapped in ancient pride. The ride began with fear. When Odahviing launched from Dragonsreach, the city vanished beneath them in a rush of wind and shouted curses from men who had not expected their courage to be tested. Hjalmar gripped the ridges between scales, his fingers aching almost immediately from cold and strain. The air tore at him. His stomach lurched as the dragon banked, and Whiterun became a patchwork of roofs and smoke far below. Then the mountains rose, and fear turned into something quieter and more dangerous. Awe. Skyrim was vast in a way that made a man feel like a passing thought. Valleys cut deep and dark. Rivers gleamed like cold steel. Forests lay like bruises against the snow. Somewhere beneath that blanket of winter were villages and graves and children learning to speak, all unaware of the dragon cutting across their sky. Odahviing flew without strain. His wings beat with slow, powerful certainty. The wind screamed past, but the dragon did not flinch. Hjalmar bent low, pressing his face against the warm edge of a scale. His eyes watered from cold. Every breath was pain. He could not afford to loosen his grip to wipe his face. He tasted salt and iron. You cling like a hatchling, Odahviing's voice rolled back over the wind, somehow clear despite the storm. Hjalmar's jaw clenched. And you fly like you've done it before, he shouted back. A deep rumble that might have been laughter vibrated through the dragon's spine. For longer than your kind has counted, Odahviing said. Before your first stone was stacked on another stone to make a hut, we flew. Hjalmar tightened his grip until his knuckles ached. Then tell me, he called, forcing the question out past the wind. Why does Alduin hide? If he is what he claims, why flee from me? Odahviing's wings dipped slightly as if he were shrugging. Alduin does not hide, he said. He goes where he wills. He fled, Hjalmar insisted. Silence stretched. The storm ate at it. Then Odahviing spoke again, and his voice had changed, less mocking, more cautious. Alduin fled because he tasted dragonrend, he said. He felt the wound. It is wrong. It is a thing that should not exist. It makes even the proudest dove feel small. Hjalmar swallowed against the wind. It makes you mortal, he said. Odahviing's tone sharpened. Do not speak that word as if you understand it, he snapped. You are mortal without effort. It clings to you like stink. For a dragon, mortality is an insult. And yet, Hjalmar shouted, Alduin can be forced into it. Odahviing's wings beat harder, and the gust nearly tore Hjalmar's hands loose. He dug in, grimacing. Alduin should not be forced, Odahviing said. and there was something like fury under the words, but also fear. He is the first. He is the ending. If he can be forced, then what does that make the rest of us? Hjalmar felt his stomach twist. The dragon's question was not philosophical. It was personal. If Alduin could be brought down, then every dragon's claim to permanence became a lie. That, Hjalmar said, voice ragged, is why you followed him, not out of loyalty, out of terror. Odahviing did not answer immediately. The mountains ahead grew steeper, more jagged. Snow thickened into a blizzard, swallowing the horizon. Hjalmar could barely see the tips of Odahviing's wings. When Odahviing spoke, it was softer, almost unwilling. We followed because he was strong, he said. Because strength is truth among the Dove. But Alduin's strength is tangled. It is not only claw and flame. It is his name, his place in the world. Without him, the Dove would have to decide what we are. Hjalmar's fingers went numb. He forced them to keep moving. And what are you? He asked. Odahviing's laugh came again, bitter now. Hungry, he said. Proud. Lost. He paused and added, as if admitting it cost him, afraid. The blizzard parted for a heartbeat, and Hjalmar saw a distant ridge crowned with a temple that looked like a black tooth biting into the sky. Skuldafn. Even from afar it felt wrong, like a scar on the land. The stone was too dark. The shape was too sharp. The air around it seemed to swallow light. Odahviing's voice dropped. We are near, he said. When I set you down, you will not call me again unless you are ready to pay. Hjalmar swallowed, tasting cold. Pay what? Odahviing's wings angled, descending. The price of endings, he said, and the words were lost almost immediately in the roar of wind. Hjalmar looked down at the world far beneath and wondered when exactly he had become a man bargaining with dragons about the end of everything. Skuldafn greeted him with silence that was not peaceful. Odahviing landed on a broken terrace with a jolt that nearly shook Hjalmar's bones loose. The dragon's claws dug into the stone, and steam rose where his heat met the snow. For a moment, Hjalmar stayed crouched between scales, letting his legs remember what ground felt like. You have your door, Odahviing said, voice low, almost respectful. Beyond it is not for mortals. Hjalmar slid down, boots crunching on ice. He looked up at the dragon's face, so close he could see the old scars along his snout. And yet, Hjalmar said, it will be. Odahviing's eyes narrowed. Do not confuse stubbornness with destiny, he warned. Hjalmar gave a humorless smile. In Skyrim, they're the same thing. Odahviing snorted a burst of steam. Then he spread his wings and launched back into the blizzard, vanishing as if swallowed by the mountain itself. Hjalmar stood alone on the terrace, the storm clawing at him. Ahead, Skuldafn's temple loomed, its stone dark against the white world. Steps led upward, flanked by ruined pillars carved with dragon motifs. Torches burned despite the wind, their flames stubborn and orange, guarded by men who wore bone masks and furs. Dragon cultists. They moved like people who had stepped out of an old story and refused to return to the grave. Their eyes behind the masks were too bright. Their mouths were set in hard lines. They carried curved blades and staffs, etched with symbols that made Hjalmar's skin prickle. A shout went up when they saw him. Not surprise, but recognition. They knew what he was. Of course they did. The Dragonborn was the hinge on which their faith swung. Hjalmar drew his sword anyway. Steel was a comfort, even when it was meaningless. The first cultist rushed him with a cry that sounded like prayer. Hjalmar stepped aside and slammed his shield into the man's ribs. Bone cracked. The cultist's breath whooshed out, and Hjalmar's blade took his throat before the man hit the ground. The blood steamed on the snow. Others came. They moved in pairs, trying to hem him in. One swung a staff that crackled with frost. The cold hit Hjalmar's cheek like a slap, numbing skin. He snarled, shoved forward, and caught the staff with his shield. The impact rang up his arm. Pain flared. He drove his sword into the cultist's belly and twisted. He did not have time to feel disgust. The storm did not allow it. The cult did not allow it. A Draugr rose from behind a broken pillar, eyes burning with blue fire. Its ancient armor clinked as it moved, stiff but relentless. It opened its mouth and shouted, something guttural and cold that slammed into Hjalmar and drove him back a step. The air stank of old death. Hjalmar answered with his own voice, not a shout meant to kill, but to clear space. The sound blasted out, and the Draugr staggered, frozen in surprise, as if offended that a living man dared speak the language of dead kings. Hjalmar charged and hacked it down. The blade bit into ancient bone. The Draugr fell apart like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He climbed the steps, leaving bodies behind. His breath came hard. The wind lashed his face. His arms burned with fatigue. At the temple doors, he paused. They were carved with dragons in relief, their mouths open, their eyes empty. The stone was cold beneath his glove, and when he pressed his palm to it, he felt a faint vibration, like a heartbeat deep within the mountain. He pushed. The doors opened with a groan, and warm air spilled out, warm, but wrong, like a breath from a tomb. Inside, the temple was lit by braziers that burned with sickly green flame. Shadows clung to the corners. The floor was littered with ash and old offerings. The walls were carved with scenes of dragons crowned like kings and men kneeling like cattle. In the center of the chamber was a portal. It looked like a ring of stone, carved with runes, set upright like a standing tombstone. Inside it, there was not empty air, but swirling light, gray and gold, and something darker. The air around it smelled like rain and old blood. Hjalmar could hear a faint sound, like distant singing carried through water. Sovngarde. He had heard bards sing of it with smiles and raised mugs. Here, with the portal humming like a wound, it did not feel like a reward. It felt like a place men went because they had no choice. Behind him, footsteps scraped. A dragon priest stepped out of the shadows, tall, wrapped in robes, a mask of gold fixed to his face. The eyes behind it glowed like coals. Hjalmar's skin crawled. The priest's voice came out like dry leaves. "You are late," it said. Hjalmar lifted his sword. "I'm here," he said. The priest raised its hands, and the air filled with crackling magic, cold and hungry. Hjalmar did not wait. He lunged, shouting as he moved, and his voice slammed into the priest like a hammer. The robed figure staggered, and Hjalmar's blade cut through cloth and ancient flesh. The priest's body crumbled, ash spilling out of its sleeves. The mask hit the floor with a dull clang. Hjalmar stood over it, chest heaving, and stared at the portal. The singing grew louder, as if hearing his heartbeat. He took a step forward. The air inside the ring was cold and warm at once. It tasted like mead and grave dirt. It smelled like pine smoke and endings. Hjalmar thought of Balgruf's hall, of Lydia's steady eyes, of Arngir's warning, of Delphine's clenched jaw. He thought of Alduin's voice in the storm. "You cannot kill what I am." He stepped through. For an instant, everything went white. Then the world fell away, and Hjalmar fell with it. Woke to a sky that was not a sky. It was a vault of strange light, auroras like green fire, stars too sharp, darkness too close. The air tasted of cold iron and sweet smoke. Beneath his boots was grass that shimmered faintly, as if each blade remembered being sung into existence. Ahead, a bridge arched over a chasm filled with rolling mist. The bridge was made of bone, massive ribs and curved spines, bleached white, fitted together with the brutal elegance of something built by giants who did not care if mortals were frightened. The chasm beneath roiled with gray fog that moved like a living thing, whispering, swallowing, hungry. Hjalmar stood slowly, feeling the ache in every limb. His body had carried him through blizzard, cultists, death magic. and now it carried him into this place that felt like a story wearing the skin of reality. He took one step, then another, toward the bridge. A figure stepped out of the shadow at the bridge's near end and blocked the way. He was huge, broad as a bear, tall as a doorframe, wrapped in furs and bronze that glinted in the strange light. His beard was thick, his eyes bright, and he held an axe that looked as though it had been forged from the idea of battle itself. Kai. Hjalmar had heard the name spoken in whispers by old Nords, usually after too much drink. The guardian of the bridge, the tester of worth, the one who decided who could enter the Hall of Valor. Sun's gaze swept over Hjalmar, taking in the torn cloak, the blood crusted on his gauntlets, the exhaustion in his stance. It was not judgment. It was assessment. "You are not dead," Sun said, and the words were not a question. Hjalmar's throat felt dry. "Not yet," he said. Sun's mouth twitched, almost amused. "And yet here you stand," he rumbled, "in a place where the living do not belong." Hjalmar looked past him at the bridge, at the mist churning beneath, and somewhere beyond it he could see the shape of a great hall in the distance, its roof glowing faintly, its doors like dark mouths. The Hall of Valor, Sovngarde's heart. "I came for Alduin," Hjalmar said. At the name, Sun's expression hardened. "That devourer," he snarled. "He fouls this realm. He steals the souls of my lord's guests as if they were meat hung in a hall." "No?" "Nayo." Hjalmar swallowed. "Then let me pass," he said. "I'll stop him." Sun studied him again. "Many have sworn that," he said. "Some were brave, some were fools. All were dead before they arrived." "I'm here," Hjalmar said, and felt the simplicity of it. He was tired of speeches. He was tired of prophecy and politics. He was here. That had to be enough. Sun lifted his axe slightly. "Then prove it," he said. Hjalmar's grip tightened on his sword. The absurdity of it almost made him laugh. Fighting a guardian in the afterlife while his lungs still breathed. But he could not deny the old ways. The Nords made gates out of pride and blood. Sun was both. They met on the bridge's first span. Sun moved with shocking speed for a man his size. His axe came down in a brutal arc that would have split Hjalmar from shoulder to hip if it connected. Hjalmar twisted, the blade whistling past his ear, and the air it displaced felt like a punch. He swung his sword and it rang against Sun's bronze bracer, sparks flying. Sun grinned, teeth bared, and shoved forward, his weight a wall. Hjalmar stumbled back, boots scraping on bone. The bridge beneath them felt alive. It creaked as if it resented being used by the living. Hjalmar ducked another swing, rolled, came up on one knee and drove his shoulder into Sun's thigh. It was like hitting a tree. Pain shot through him. Sun did not move. He laughed again, booming, and brought the butt of his axe down toward Hjalmar's skull. Hjalmar shouted without thinking. The voice burst out, raw and forceful. It hit Sun like a gust and shoved him back half a step. Not much. Not enough. But enough. Enough for Hjalmar to breathe, to stand, to meet Sun's gaze. Sun's laughter faded. His eyes narrowed, intrigued. "So," he said, voice lower, "you do carry the voice like the old tongues." Hjalmar's chest heaved. "I carry it," he rasped, "because the world needs it." Sun paused, then lowered his axe. "Perhaps," he said, as if tasting the word. He looked down the bridge, then back at Hjalmar. "But worth is not only strength, it is also intent." Hjalmar felt sweat cold on his skin. "My intent is to stop Alduin," he said. "To free the souls he's taken." Sun's gaze held him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Cross," Sun said. "And if you fall, you will at least fall in a place where songs remember." Hjalmar walked past him, boots echoing on bone. The mist below whispered. Somewhere in it he thought he heard faint voices, Souls, perhaps, calling from within the fog, trapped and afraid. As he reached the middle of the bridge, Soon's voice rolled after him. "When your work is done," the guardian called, "you will speak with me again. Whether you return as living or dead remains to be seen." "Nee, Hjalmar did not look back. He kept walking toward the hall in the distance, toward the place where heroes feasted while a dragon devoured their kin at the edges of their joy. He stepped off the bridge and into Sovngarde proper, and the air changed again. Thicker, sweeter, heavy with smoke and memory. Somewhere ahead, Alduin was feeding. Hjalmar felt the dragon rend in his throat like a thorn. The Hall of Valor was not what Hjalmar expected. He had imagined something clean and shining, a place scrubbed of pain. Instead, it was a hall like any other Nord hall, just larger, older, and filled with a kind of life so fierce it bordered on sorrow. Long tables stretched beneath high beams. Fires burned in pits along the floor, their smoke drifting up to vanish into shadows. Mead flowed. Laughter cracked like whips. Songs rose and fell, their words half lost in the roar of voices. Men and women sat shoulder to shoulder, scars on their faces, steel at their hips, drinking as if thirst could be slain. Some looked young, as if death had taken them before age could. Others looked ancient, their eyes bright despite wrinkles. They all looked alive. Then Hjalmar noticed the gaps. There were empty spaces at the benches where no one sat. Not because the hall lacked guests, there were hundreds, but because something had taken them. The empty places felt cold even in firelight. As Hjalmar walked forward, the closest heroes fell quiet. Heads turned. Eyes followed him. Not hostile, but wary, the way wolves watch a stranger enter their territory. A woman rose from her bench and stepped into his path. Her hair was pale and braided tight. Her armor was old, marked with runes and dents. A sword hung at her side with a hilt worn smooth by long use. Her eyes were sharp enough to cut. "You stink of living," she said, voice blunt. Hjalmar gave a tired smile. "So I'm told." She stared at him a beat longer, then snorted. "I am Gormlaith," she said. "I fought Alduin when the world was young and the tongues were loud." A broad man stood up beside her. His face was scarred, one eye missing, the empty socket covered by a strip of leather. His shoulders were thick as an oak's trunk. "Hakon," he said, voice like gravel. I shouted him from the sky. An old man rose last, slower, his hands thin but steady. His eyes held a stubborn light that reminded Hjalmar of Arngeir's, though this man's expression had more humor in it. "Feldir," he said. "I kept the scroll. I watched time tear." Hjalmar's throat tightened. These were the figures from the vision. Not memory now. Not illusion. Here they stood, flesh made of legend. Gormlaith's gaze flicked over him. "You are the one with the stolen blood," she said. "The Dragonborn." "I didn't steal it," Hjalmar said. "It was given." Hakon laughed, a short bark. "Everything is stolen from someone," he said. "If not by blade, then by breath." Feldir stepped closer, studying Hjalmar's face. "You came through Skuldafn," he said, as if confirming a suspicion. "Alive. That is no small feat." Hjalmar looked past them at the hall, at the feasting heroes, and felt the weight of what he was about to ask. "Alduin is here," he said. "He's devouring the souls in the mist. I need your help to drive him out." The mention of mist changed the mood like a draft through a flame. Laughter faded. Eyes hardened. A low murmur ran through the hall. Gormlaith's hand went to her sword hilt. "That carrion eater," she spat. "He slinks in the fog like a coward and steals what is not his." Hakon's jaw clenched. "We have tried," he said. "We march out, we shout, we fight. He retreats into the mist. He returns when we tire. He is patient. He knows we cannot die again, but we can be taken." Feldir's gaze went distant, thoughtful. "He is not merely a beast. he murmured. Is purpose, a function, a weight tied to time. Hjalmar felt the word function snag on his mind. Paarthurnax had hinted at something like it. Odahviing had spoken of time with fear. Then we must change the rules, Hjalmar said. Gormlaith barked a laugh. Rules? She said. The only rule is strength. Hjalmar met her eyes. Then lend me yours, he said. A silence fell. The hall's firelight crackled. Somewhere, a cup clinked. A hero coughed. Then, slowly, Hakon nodded. I will fight, he said. Not for you, for sure. For the honor Alduin tries to steal. No, Gai. Gormlaith drew her sword partway, letting the metal sing. I will fight, she said. Because I want to see him bleed again. Feldir sighed, as if the decision cost him. I will fight, he said softly. Because time should not be chewed like gristle by a beast with delusions of kingship. Behind them, other heroes began to rise. Swords rasped from scabbards. Axes were hefted. Faces turned fierce. Hjalmar felt his chest tighten, not with fear now, but with something like grief. These were souls who had died once already, and yet they rose again to fight because that was what they were. That was what Skyrim made of men. Gormlaith stepped in close. When we face him, she said, voice low, you do not hesitate. We did not bring you here to bargain. Hjalmar held her gaze. He thought of the wall, of Delphine's hard certainty, of Arngeir's warning that intent mattered. He thought of Odahviing's bitter admission. We endure. We remember. I came to stop him, Hjalmar said. Gormlaith's eyes narrowed. Stop, she repeated, as if tasting the word like something suspicious. Hjalmar nodded. Stop, he said again, and felt the hidden edge of it. Feldir watched him with a strange look, almost pity. Be careful with that word, the old hero murmured. Sometimes the difference between stopping and ending is what breaks a world. Hjalmar did not answer. He turned toward the hall's great doors, and the heroes followed. Their footsteps shook the floor. Their voices rose in a chant, old as snow, fierce as hunger. They marched out into Sovngarde's pale light, leaving behind the warmth of the hall for the cold mist where souls were being devoured. Hjalmar felt the dragon rend in his throat, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether forcing a god to feel mortal was an act of salvation or a kind of blasphemy. Outside the Hall of Valor, the world felt unfinished. Sovngarde's landscape was beautiful in a way that hurt. A wide plain under strange light, grass rippling like an ocean. Distant mountains outlined in dark blue. But the beauty broke where the mist began. It spilled across the field in thick, rolling waves, swallowing everything beyond a few paces. It moved too deliberately, like something alive and searching. Hjalmar stepped toward it with the heroes at his back. Their presence was a pressure, a heat. Their weapons glinted. Their faces were set. Behind them, the hall's warm glow seemed suddenly far away, like an ember in a blizzard. The mist licked at Hjalmar's boots. It was cold, but not like winter. It was cold, like being forgotten. His skin prickled. The hair on his arms lifted. He could hear whispers in it, fragments of voices, half-words, names that dissolved when he tried to catch them. Gormlaith strode beside him, sword out. He's in there, she said, voice sharp, feasting like a wolf in a sheepfold. Hakon grunted, adjusting his grip on his axe. We cut, he said. We shout. We drag him out. Noi, Ra, Bisha. Feldir's gaze stayed fixed on the mist as if he could see through it. Mist is not merely air, he murmured. It is concealment made real. Kind of hunger. Hjalmar took another step, and the world vanished. The mist swallowed him up to the knees, the waist, the chest. It wrapped around his face like wet cloth. The heroes behind him blurred into shapes, their voices muffled. His own breath sounded distant. For a heartbeat, fear surged. Not the fear of dying, he had faced that too often, but the fear of disappearing, of being consumed without leaving a story behind. A shadow moved in the mist. Hjalmar spun, blade up. Something brushed past his shoulder, cold, insubstantial, like a hand made of smoke. A voice hissed in his ear, not in anger, but in longing. "Help, Dottie." Hjalmar's throat tightened. He glanced down and saw, through the fog, a pale face staring up at him. Eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. A soul, caught and drowning. Then it was gone, swallowed back into the gray. Gormlaith cursed, swinging her sword at nothing. "He takes them," she snarled. "He takes them and laughs." Hjalmar closed his eyes briefly and listened. Under the whispers, under the muffled chant of heroes, there was another sound, a low, distant rumble like thunder trapped behind mountains. "Alduin." Hjalmar opened his eyes and lifted his chin. "He's ahead," he said. They pushed forward. The mist thickened. It fought them, tugging at their limbs, pulling at their thoughts. Hjalmar felt his memories wobble, as if the fog were trying to steal not only his body but his mind. For a terrifying moment, he could not remember the feel of Whiterun's cobblestones or the taste of mead. The mist wanted him empty. He shouted, "Not Dragonrend, not yet," but a word of power meant to clear air, to force space. The voice slammed outward, and the mist recoiled, torn apart for a heartbeat like a curtain yanked aside. In that brief opening, Hjalmar saw Alduin. He stood in the distance, massive, black against the pale world. His wings were folded, his head lowered, and around him the mist churned like a cauldron. Shapes moved toward his mouth, souls, pale and luminous, dragged as if by invisible hooks. Alduin inhaled, and the souls vanished into him, snuffed like candles. Hjalmar's stomach turned. The act was too intimate, too obscene. It was not a dragon burning a village. It was a creature feeding on what made a person a person. Hakon roared and charged, his voice echoing strangely in the mist. Gormlaith sprinted beside him, sword raised. The other heroes surged forward with a sound like an avalanche, their fury a physical thing. Alduin lifted his head. His eyes met Hjalmar's even at that distance, and Hjalmar felt, again, that cold recognition. The World Eater knew him, knew the shout in his throat, knew the insult of being forced to feel mortal. Alduin's mouth opened, and the mist trembled as if in anticipation. Hjalmar sucked in a breath that tasted of forgotten names, and shouted Dragonrend. The words tore through the fog like lightning. Alduin jerked, his massive body shuddering. The mist around him ripped apart as if repelled. For a heartbeat, the great dragon looked exposed, vulnerable. Not physically. His scales still looked like iron, but in spirit, as if some inner certainty had cracked. The heroes crashed into the clearing like a wave, weapons striking, voices shouting, anger made flesh. Alduin roared, and his roar was no longer distant thunder. It was right there, shaking the bones in Hjalmar's body. Heat blasted outward. The ground trembled. The battle began in earnest. Hjalmar ran forward, blade ready, voice burning in his throat, and in the back of his mind a quiet thought whispered, "If I can force him to feel mortal here in the land of the dead, then what else can the voice force? And what would it cost?" First breath of fire did not behave like ordinary flame. It rolled out of Alduin's mouth in a dark torrent, almost oily, and the air itself seemed to bend away from it. Where it touched the ground, grass blackened and curled, not merely burned, but erased. The heat slammed into Hjalmar's skin and made his eyes water. He threw himself aside as the fire scoured the space where he had been, leaving behind a scar of smoking earth. Heroes screamed, not in fear, but in rage, the sound of people who had already died and refused to be intimidated by death a second time. Gormlaith charged through the heat as if it were rain, her sword glowing faintly with runes. Hakon swung his axe into Alduin's foreleg with the savage satisfaction of a man striking back at fate itself. The blade bit. Alduin's scales held, but sparks flew. Alduin roared, and the sound hammered the clearing. Hjalmar rolled onto his knees, coughing, his lungs burning. He could taste smoke, but it was not the smoke of wood. It was the smoke of something older, smoke that smelled like the first fire ever lit. Feldir stood near the edge of the clearing, his hands raised, eyes closed, lips moving. Hjalmar could not hear the words over the battle, but he could feel the intent in them, an old man calling on stubbornness and cunning, not magic. The air around Feldir shimmered faintly, as if time itself were being coaxed into holding still. Hjalmar rose and ran forward again. He knew, with a clarity that cut through fear, that steel would not do this. The heroes could hack at Alduin until their arms fell off, and it would not matter unless the voice made it matter. Dragonrend had to hold. The insult had to stay dug into Alduin's spirit like a hook. He opened his mouth and shouted again, forcing the words through smoke and pain. The shout struck Alduin like a lash. Alduin's wings jerked. His head snapped toward Hjalmar. For an instant, the dragon's eyes widened, and Hjalmar saw it again. The flash of something almost human. Not kindness. Not remorse. Fear. Alduin lunged. The ground shook as the dragon's bulk surged forward. His claws gouged deep trenches in the earth. Hjalmar sprinted toward him because running away would only make him prey. He slid under the sweep of Alduin's talons, feeling the wind of it rip at his cloak, and came up near the dragon's chest where the scales were thicker, layered like armor. He swung his sword at a joint where plate met plate, aiming for weakness. The blade rang off scales, jarring his arm. Pain shot through his wrist. The dragon's body was a fortress. Hjalmar's teeth bared. He shoved his shield up, not to block a strike but to steady himself, and shouted into Alduin's chest. The voice slammed out. The air shuddered. Alduin's body jerked, as if the sound had struck something inside him that flesh could not protect. Alduin's roar cracked, and the sound that came out was not triumphant. It was furious, but under it there was a rawness that did not belong to gods. Gormlaith saw the opening and drove in. She leapt, catching a ridge of scale with her free hand, and hauled herself up Alduin's shoulder like a climber scaling a cliff. Her sword stabbed down at the base of his neck. The blade bit between scales, and dark ichor spilled, hot enough to steam in the cold air. Alduin bucked, trying to throw her off. Haakon slammed his axe again into the leg, and the dragon's limb wobbled. The clearing was chaos. Fire, smoke, shouted words, the clang of steel against scale. Souls ripped free from the mist and swirled above like pale sparks, drawn by the violence, by the presence of Alduin's hunger. The air filled with faint, distant cries. Hjalmar's heart pounded. He felt the shout in his throat, burning, and he knew with a strange, bleak certainty that he could keep doing this, keep forcing mortality into Alduin, until something broke. But what, exactly, would break? Alduin's head swung down. His jaws opened, teeth like spears, and for a heartbeat, Hjalmar saw his own reflection in the black glass of Alduin's eye. Small, fierce, trembling. Alduin snapped. Hjalmar threw himself backward, the teeth clamping shut where his head had been. The snap echoed like a tree splitting. The air displaced by it knocked Hjalmar off his feet. He hit the ground hard, breath knocked out of him. Above, Gormlaith lost her grip and fell, landing in a roll that would have shattered a living woman's bones. She rose anyway, snarling, her face smeared with ichor and fury. Feldir's voice rose suddenly, clearer now. He shouted, not Dragonrend, not a killing word, but something old, something that sounded like a plea to the world itself. The air around Alduin thickened. For a heartbeat, the dragon's movements slowed, as if the weight of time had increased. Hjalmar seized the chance. He pushed himself up, ignoring the protest of his bruised ribs, and shouted Dragonrend again with everything he had left. The words struck Alduin like an anchor. The great dragon shuddered. His wings sagged. His head dipped. His breath came out in a rough, almost ragged exhale. He was tired. The thought was impossible. And yet there it was, plain as blood on snow. Alduin, the World Eater, was tired. Hjalmar stood, sword in hand, staring at the dragon's lowered head. Around him, heroes moved in, weapons ready, faces fierce with the joy of finally cornering their enemy. Gormlaith raised her sword high. Hakon stepped forward, axe poised. Felder's hands lowered, his face pale with strain. It was the moment the wall had carved into stone. The moment Delphine had demanded. The moment bards would sing of. Kill him. Hjalmar took a step forward. Alduin lifted his head just enough to look at him. And in those eyes, Hjalmar saw something that stopped his blood. Not fear of death. Fear of being ended in the wrong way. Fear of being made small forever. Hjalmar's grip on his sword tightened until his fingers ached. He heard Gormlaith's voice behind him, sharp as a whip. No! Hjalmar inhaled. The air tasted of smoke and lost souls. He did not swing. Silence, in the middle of battle, is louder than any roar. It fell over the clearing like a dropped cloak. Not total. Fires still crackled. Souls still whispered faintly. Alduin still breathed. But the shape of the fight changed. The heroes' bodies froze in mid-motion, caught between rage and disbelief. Hjalmar stood with his sword lowered, point angled toward the ground. His arm trembled from fatigue and from something else he did not want to name. Gormlaith stared at him as if he had just stepped in front of her blade. "What are you doing?" she snarled. Hakon's one eye narrowed. His axe hovered in the air, ready to fall. "Finish it," he growled. Feldir did not speak. He watched Hjalmar with a look that was almost dread, as if he could see where this choice might lead. Alduin's breath came in harsh gusts. Each exhale sent steam and smoke into the air. The dragon's head was lowered, his neck muscles tense, as if he expected a blow any heartbeat. Hjalmar stared into Alduin's eyes. In them, he saw not only anger but something like calculation. Alduin was a creature of pride, of hunger, of myth. Yet in this moment, he was also a being forced into a corner he had never prepared for, a moment where he could be ended by a mortal hand. But what caught Hjalmar, the hook in his gut, was the flicker behind the pride, the flash of something that looked like despair, quickly swallowed. It made no sense. A god should not despair. Hjalmar's voice came out rough. "Why do you feed here?" he asked. The question surprised even him. Gormlaith's mouth fell open. "Are you mad?" she snapped. "He's not a man to answer your questions." Alduin's eyes narrowed. His voice came out low, ragged with Dragonren's wound. "Because I will not be denied," he hissed. "Because the world thinks it can cage me with prophecy and then forget me when it suits." Hjalmar felt his stomach twist. Denied by whom? He pressed, and heard his own stubbornness echoed in the question. Alduin's lips curled back. "By time," he spat. "By the one who made me and then tried to bind me." Feldir's breath caught. Hjalmar felt it. The old hero's eyes widened, then softened with a horrible understanding. Hjalmar glanced back at Feldir. "You knew," he said quietly. Feldir's voice was a whisper. "We guessed," he said. "We told ourselves it didn't matter. We told ourselves that a monster is simpler than a god with a purpose." Gormlaith slammed her sword tip into the ground. "Purpose?" she snapped. "His purpose is to devour. Let him choke on it." Hjalmar turned to her. "If he is meant to end the world," he said, "and I kill him here, what happens to the ending?" Hakon's laugh was short and harsh. "The world lives," he said. "That's what happens." Hjalmar's gaze held his. "For how long?" he asked. "And at what cost?" Hakon's jaw clenched. "Cost," he repeated. "We paid the cost when he burned our homes. We paid it when we died. This is justice." Hjalmar looked back at Alduin. The dragon's chest rose and fell heavy. His eyes did not look away. He was listening. That, too, felt wrong. "What happens?" Hjalmar said slowly. "If you're killed when you're not supposed to be? If the world's ending is ripped out like a rotten tooth?" Alduin's laugh was bitter. "You think like a priest," he rasped. Hjalmar's throat tightened. "No," he said. "I think like a man who has watched others use destiny as an excuse to murder." Gormlaith took a step forward, fury radiating from her like heat. "If you don't strike," she hissed, "I will." Hjalmar moved before he could think. He stepped between Gormlaith and Alduin, sword still lowered but his stance firm. "You'll have to go through me," he said. For a heartbeat, Gormlaith stared at him as if she might. Her face was a mask of rage and disbelief. Then she spat in the grass. "You insult us," she said, voice shaking. "You insult Shore's Hall." Hjalmar did not flinch. "If Shore's Hall requires blind slaughter to feel honored," he said, "then maybe it's not as glorious as the songs claim." Hakon's axe lowered slightly, not in peace, but in uncertainty. "Dragonborn," he said, voice thick, "you're playing with things you don't understand." Hjalmar's gaze flicked to Feldir again. "Maybe none of us understood," he said. He turned back to Alduin. The dragon's eyes burned with hatred, and something else, a sharp, wary attention. "You spare me," Alduin rasped. "Out of fear? Out of arrogance?" Hjalmar's breath came out slow. "Neither," he said. "I refuse to be a tool." Alduin's nostrils flared. "You are a tool," he hissed. "A shard of my father's will, a blade forged to cut me down." Hjalmar's voice dropped. "Then I'll cut something else," he said. And with that, he opened his mouth. Not to shout Dragonrend again, not to kill, but to speak a word he had not known existed until this moment. A word that was not hatred. A word that was command, and reminder, and refusal all at once. The air trembled in anticipation. Even the mist seemed to pause, listening. Hjalmar had never believed words could change the shape of reality until he learned the voice. Even then, he had told himself it was only force, a hammer made of sound. He had used it to throw men back, to shatter doors, to drag dragons from the sky. He had treated it like steel, simple and brutal. Now, standing before Alduin in the land of the dead, he felt how small that understanding was. The word he spoke could not come from a word wall, nor from a teacher, nor from the Elder Scrolls' bitter light. It rose up from the place where Dragonrend had torn him open and left him raw. It rose from the thought that had haunted him since Odahviing's admission and Arngeir's warning, and Feldir's quiet dread. Stopping is not ending. The shout that left Hjalmar's throat was not loud, not at first. It was low, almost intimate, like the beginning of a prayer spoken too close to someone's ear. Yet the air around him shuddered as if struck. The grass bowed. The mist recoiled. The fires in the clearing leaned toward him, flames stretching like hands. Alduin's eyes widened. Something invisible snapped into place between them, a line drawn not in blood but in time. The aurora above flared brighter, green ribbons twisting into patterns that made Hjalmar's head ache. For an instant he saw shapes in the light, wheels, spirals, a serpent biting its own tail. Time made visible and intolerable. Alduin's breath hitched. The World Eater's body trembled, and it was not the trembling of a beast in pain, but the shudder of something being reminded of a truth it had tried to forget. Hjalmar felt it too. The shout did not flow outward and vanish. It looped back, flooding his mind with visions that were not his. He saw a sky that was not Skyrim's sky, a sky filled with golden light and the outline of a dragon so vast it seemed to be the sky itself. A presence, Akatosh, though no mortal tongue could truly name it, turning in slow, endless coils. He felt the weight of time like a river pressing against a dam. And he saw Alduin, not as a tyrant, not as a monster, but as a shape pulled from that golden coil and set into the world like a stone placed at the end of a path. Alduin made to end. Made not to conquer but to close. A function, Feldir had said. A purpose. In the vision, Alduin stretched his wings and roared, and the sound was not hunger but obedience. He took his place at the edge of a world and waited. Then something changed. Alduin turned his head. He looked back into the world he was meant to end. He saw dragons worshipped like gods, men kneeling, fear offered up like wine. He tasted pride. He forgot waiting. He began to want. The vision shifted, faster now. Ages tumbling. Dragons ruling, men enslaved. The dragon war, the tongue's fury. Dragonren tearing through Alduin's endlessness like a blade. Alduin cast forward through time by the Elder Scroll, ripped from the moment he should have ended the world and flung into the future like a punishment. Hjalmar felt Alduin's rage at that. Rage not at being defeated, but at being delayed. Rage at being denied the one act he was made for. Rage at being forced to exist in a world that had moved on without him. Then he felt the fear. Not fear of death. Fear of irrelevance. If the world learned to live without him, what was he? If the Kalpa continued without an ending, did time rot? Did creation stagnate? Did his father, time itself, abandon him? Alduin, in the vision, thrashed against an invisible chain. He devoured souls not because he needed them like food, but because consuming them made him feel necessary again. It made him feel like the ending. The vision snapped back into the clearing. Hjalmar's knees almost buckled under the weight of what he had seen. His eyes burned. His throat felt torn open. He tasted blood. Alduin stared at him, and the hatred in the dragon's gaze had shifted. It was still there, sharp and black, but now it was laced with something else. Recognition. You. Remind, Alduin rasped. The words strained as if dragged through teeth. Hjalmar's voice was hoarse. I do, he said. I remind you of what you were before you decided you were king. Gormley's face was pale with disbelief. What are you doing? She whispered, and for the first time her voice held something like fear. Not of Alduin, but of Hjalmar. Hakon stared at Hjalmar as if seeing him for the first time. Feldir's eyes shone with tears he refused to let fall. Alduin's wings twitched. The Dragonren still held him in the shape of mortality, still forced him to feel. But now, Hjalmar's new shout wrapped around that wound like a bandage made of iron. The air around Alduin shimmered. Not chains of metal, but bands of light that looked like twisted aurora, tightening, settling. They did not bind his body. They bound his intent. Alduin's nostrils flared. You think you can command me? He hissed. Hjalmar swallowed, forcing his breath steady. Not command, he said. Correct. Alduin's laughter came out broken, half a cough. Correct, he repeated, tasting the insult. A mortal dares correct the World Eater. Hjalmar stepped closer, ignoring the heat rolling off the dragon. Alduin, he said, and speaking the name felt like holding a hot coal. You are not meant to devour this realm in secret like a thief. If you are the ending, then end when the ending comes. Not because you're afraid, not because you're afraid. For a heartbeat, the clearing held its breath. Then Alduin's gaze lifted, not to Hjalmar, not to the heroes, but upward, toward the aurora and the strange sky. His eyes narrowed, as if looking at something only he could see. Time. His chest rose in a deep inhale. His body trembled. And in that trembling, Hjalmar felt the weight of choice. A dragon choosing was not a small thing. It was like a mountain deciding to move. Alduin's head lowered again, and his voice came out quieter, rough with something like pain. If I wait, he said, they will forget. Hjalmar's throat tightened. He thought of empty seats in the hall, of souls pulled into darkness. He thought of men in Skyrim who would forget as soon as they were warm and safe again. Then let them, Hjalmar said. Being remembered isn't your right. Alduin's eyes burned. For a heartbeat, Hjalmar thought the dragon would kill him anyway. Shout or no shout, bound intent or no. Pride could override purpose. Rage could override fate. Then Alduin did something Hjalmar had never seen a dragon do. He hesitated. The mist moved first. It did not simply thin like fog under sunlight. It recoiled, as if drawn backward by an unseen tide. The gray waves that had choked the field began to pull away from the clearing, rolling back toward the chasm and the far edges of Sovngarde. Whispers faded. The air tasted less like forgotten names and more like smoke and grass. Souls drifted free. They rose out of the receding mist like pale lanterns, flickering with faint light. Some hovered uncertainly, as if not trusting their freedom. Others shot upward like arrows, racing toward the hall as if the memory of warmth pulled them. Hjalmar stood rooted in place, watching, chest heaving. His throat burned. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth where the strain of the shout had torn something inside. He wiped it away with the back of his gauntlet and found his hands shaking. Around him, heroes lowered their weapons slowly, as if afraid that any movement might break whatever fragile change had begun. Gormley's sword tip drooped toward the grass. Her face was a mask of anger and confusion. Hakon's axe hung heavy at his side. Feldir sank to one knee, exhausted, and pressed a hand to his chest as if steadying his heart. Alduin lifted his head. The dragon's eyes did not blaze with triumph. They looked distant, focused inward. His wings flexed once, twice, not in preparation to attack, but like a creature testing whether it still belonged in this place. Hjalmar felt a strange ache in his chest, an emotion he could not name. He had come here ready to kill, ready to be the ending of the ending. Instead, he had forced a god to remember, and asked him to wait. He had asked the World Eater to show restraint. Alduin's gaze returned to him. "You bind my hunger," he said, voice rough. "You would chain a storm and call it peace." Hjalmar swallowed against pain. "I would chain a storm to its season," he said. "Not let it fall on harvest out of spite." Alduin's lips curled slightly, not in a smile, but in something close to respect. "Bold," he rasped, "and foolish." "Maybe," Hjalmar said. Alduin's eyes narrowed. "If you are wrong," he said, and the words carried the weight of worlds, "your mercy will rot time. Your defiance will twist the river. Kalpas will tangle, and your name will be cursed by those who come after." "Nay." Hjalmar's stomach tightened, but he did not look away. "If I am right," he said, voice low, "then your pride ends today." For a heartbeat, Alduin held his gaze. Then he looked upward again. The aurora flickered. The air shimmered. Hjalmar felt something tug at him, not a physical pull, but a sense of reality loosening. The grass underfoot seemed to blur at the edges. The light above sharpened into painful clarity. Time itself felt like a skin being stretched. Alduin began to unravel. Not dying. Hjalmar knew death when he saw it, even here. This was different. Alduin's outline shimmered, his scales catching the aurora light until black turned to a strange dark green. His body became less solid, as if he were stepping backward through a door only he could see. Gormlaith took a step forward, sword rising again out of instinct. "Don't let him," she began. Hjalmar lifted a hand, palm out, and she stopped. Rage warred with obedience on her face. She looked as if she might spit at him again, but she held. Feldir's voice was a whisper. "He's leaving," he said, and the wonder in his tone was heavy with dread. "Not fleeing, leaving." Alduin's voice rolled out, lower now, as if it came from far away. "I will return," he said. "Not because you spared me, not because I owe you." His gaze fixed on Hjalmar, sharp even as his body faded. "Because I am the end, and the end comes." Hjalmar's throat tightened. "When it comes," he said, "come as what you were made to be, not as a tyrant." Alduin's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, Hjalmar thought the dragon might laugh again. Instead, Alduin's voice came out quiet, almost unwilling. "We shall see," he said. Then the World Eater vanished. Not into smoke, not into ash, but into absence. as if the world itself had decided he was not in this moment anymore. The air snapped back. The aurora steadied. The grass stopped trembling. The clearing felt suddenly too empty. Hjalmar stood breathing hard, sword still in hand, and realized his legs were shaking so badly he might fall. A heavy footstep sounded behind him. He turned and saw Tsune at the edge of the field, axe resting on his shoulder, beard stirring in the faint wind. The guardian's expression was grim. "You did not kill him," Tsune said. Hjalmar swallowed. "No," he said. Tsune's eyes bored into him. "You have changed something," he rumbled. "Something older than your bones. Older than my lord's hall." Hjalmar felt the weight of that. "I stopped him," he said. Tsune's mouth tightened. "For now," he said. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be certain your defiance is not merely pride wearing a kinder mask." Hjalmar's jaw clenched. "I'm tired of pride," he said. "Men kill for it. Dragons devour for it. I'm tired of it." Tsune studied him, then nodded once, slow. "Then you must carry the tiredness like a weapon," he said. "Because the world will demand certainty from you, and certainty is a tempting lie." Behind them, the mist continued to retreat. Souls drifted toward the hall, freed. The heroes watched the empty sky where Alduin had been. Some looked relieved. Some looked furious. Some looked frightened in a way they had not been even in battle, frightened of a future without a clear ending. Hjalmar turned toward the hall. His knees threatened to buckle. He forced them to hold. He had done what no prophecy had shown. Now, he had to live with it. Returning to the living world felt like waking into a colder kind of dream. One moment Hjalmar stood on Sovngarde's grass, smoke and aurora in the air, the echo of Alduin's vanishing still ringing in his bones. The next, he stood on the throat of the world again, snow crunching under his boots, the thin air stabbing his lungs with familiar pain. The sky was pale with early morning. The world below was hidden beneath cloud. The time wound shimmered faintly nearby, as if remembering the violence done to it. The mountain looked unchanged, indifferent. Hjalmar did not feel unchanged. His body swayed, and he caught himself on his sword like an old man leaning on a cane. He swallowed hard against nausea. His throat felt raw, scraped open by the shout he had pulled from somewhere deep. When he breathed, his ribs complained. Footsteps approached, soft on snow. Arngir and the Greybeards stood a short distance away, their robes rippling in the wind. Their faces were solemn. They looked at him the way priests look at a man who returns from the altar covered in blood, with reverence and fear. Paarthurnax perched on a ridge above, his huge body still and watchful. When he saw Hjalmar, the old dragon moved, climbing down with care that belied his size. He lowered his head until his snout was near Hjalmar's face. Warm breath washed over him, smelling of smoke and mountain air. "You return," Paarthurnax rumbled. Hjalmar's mouth felt dry. "I did," he said. His voice came out hoarse. Arngir stepped forward. "Is it done?" he asked. The question held years of waiting, centuries of prayer. Hjalmar closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He saw Alduin's eyes, the aurora twisting into chains, the mist retreating. He opened his eyes again and faced them. "It is stopped," he said. Arngir's brows knit. "Stopped," he repeated, slow. "Not ended." "No?" Hjalmar said. Silence fell. The wind filled it with a low moan. One of the Greybeards, Hrothgar perhaps, made a sound in his throat that might have been anger or grief. Another crossed himself, fingers trembling. Arngir's gaze stayed steady. "Explain," he said. Hjalmar's hands tightened on his sword hilt. "I used Dragonrend," he said. "We fought him in Sovngarde. I could have struck the last blow." His throat tightened. "I didn't." Arngir's eyes sharpened. "Why?" he asked, and the simplicity of the question cut deeper than any blade. Hjalmar looked out over the mountain's edge, where Skyrim lay unseen. He thought of villages burned by dragons. He thought of mothers burying children. He thought of Delphine's certainty that mercy was weakness. He thought of the vision the shout had forced into him. Alduin as a function, a purpose, a stone placed at the end of a path. He is meant to end the world, Hjalmar said slowly. Arngeir did not flinch. The Greybeards had always known the old myths. Still, hearing it spoken out loud made the air feel heavier. And yet you spared him, Arngeir said. I bound him, Hjalmar corrected, and his voice turned hard. I reminded him. I forced him to wait. Paarthurnax's eye narrowed, thoughtful. Ah, he murmured. A different kind of victory. One of the Greybeards stepped forward, anger slipping through his usual calm. You played a god, he accused. Hjalmar's head snapped toward him. The words hit something raw. No, he said, sharper than he intended. I refuse to be one. Arngeir raised a hand, stilling the others. The blades will not accept this, he said quietly. Hjalmar felt a cold knot in his stomach. I know, he said. Paarthurnax's voice rolled out, low and resonant. Many will not accept, he said. Mortals crave endings. They crave the story where the beast is slain and the world becomes simple again. The old dragon's gaze fixed on Hjalmar. But you have chosen a path that leaves the world complicated. Hjalmar swallowed. I didn't do it to be complicated, he said. Paarthurnax's nostrils flared. Of course not, he said. You did it because you feared the cost of the simple answer. Arngeir stepped closer, his beard stirring in the wind. There is something else, he said, voice careful. When Alduin is slain, the cycle continues. Some say the world is reborn. Others say time collapses. These are not matters for mortal hands. Hjalmar's mouth tightened. And yet mortal hands were what the prophecy gave, he said. Arngeir's eyes held his. Prophecy gives choices, he said. Men pretend it gives commands. Hjalmar looked down at his own hands, scarred, cracked. He had used them to kill countless times. He had used them now to refuse. What happens now? Hjalmar asked. Paarthurnax answered before Arngeir could. Now you live, he said simply. And you listen. Hjalmar let out a breath that fogged in the cold. Listen to what? Paarthurnax's gaze lifted to the sky, to the pale morning. To time, the dragon said. To the small fractures, to the way the river moves after you throw a stone into it. As if to prove his point, Hjalmar felt it then, a faint shiver in the air. Like a moment repeating itself. A snowflake fell, and for an instant he could swear he had seen that same flake fall a heartbeat before. He blinked, and the sensation was gone. But it left behind a cold certainty. The world had noticed what he had done. Arngeir watched him closely. You feel it, he said. Hjalmar nodded slowly. Then be wary, Arngeir warned. Because when you change the expected ending, you invite the unexpected. Hjalmar looked at the time wound shimmering beside them, a scar in the air that refused to heal. He felt the voice in his throat, not his power now, but his burden. He had stopped Alduin. He had not ended him. And now the mountain waited to see whether that was salvation or the first crack in the world's spine. Delphine did not wait for rumor to become fact. She hunted certainty the way other people hunted deer. Fast, relentless, hungry. Hjalmar found her in Sky Haven Temple as if she had been waiting in the stone itself, carved into the place by sheer stubbornness. The torches burned bright, throwing harsh light across the dragon carvings. Esbern hovered nearby, lantern in hand, his face pale and pinched. Delphine's sword was already out. The steel caught the torchlight and threw it back into Hjalmar's eyes. Her stance was tight, prepared, the stance of a woman who had lived too long with knives in her back to ever relax. Tell me it's not true, she said, voice low and trembling with rage. Hjalmar stopped a few paces away, hands open, palms out. He did not want his sword in this. He did not want to be forced to choose between killing Alduin and killing a woman who believed she was saving the world. It's true, he said. Delphine's jaw clenched so hard he heard her teeth grind. "You went to Sovngarde," she hissed. "You fought him, and you didn't finish it." "I stopped him," Hjalmar said. Delphine's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Stop," she spat. "That word again, like you're talking about a bar fight." Esbern stepped forward, eyes wide behind his spectacles. "You bound him?" he asked, voice frantic. You let him go." Hjalmar met Esbern's gaze. "I forced him to leave," he said. "I forced him to remember what he is." Delphine's sword tip rose. "He is a monster," she said. "Alduin is a threat, a plague. You don't remind a plague, you burn it out." Hjalmar felt anger flare in him, hot and sudden. "And when your fire burns the house down too," he snapped. Delphine's eyes flashed. "Better ashes than being eaten alive?" she said. Hjalmar took a slow breath. The temple's air felt thick, heavy with old stone and old oaths. "He is meant to end the world," he said quietly. Esbern made a choking sound. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, that's myth. It's not myth," Hjalmar said. "It's his function, his purpose. He turned it into tyranny because he feared being irrelevant." Delphine's face twisted. "You sound like a Greybeard," she snarled. Hjalmar's eyes hardened. "Maybe the Greybeards are right about something," he said. Delphine stepped forward. "This isn't philosophy," she said, her voice rising. "This is people screaming as they burn. This is villages wiped out. This is children carried out of rubble. I've seen it. I've lived it. And you stand here telling me the monster has a purpose." Hjalmar held her gaze. He saw the pain under her fury. The years of running, hiding, losing friends, watching the Thalmor crush anyone who resisted. Delphine's world had never rewarded mercy. Of course she believed in clean endings. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Hjalmar said, voice lower. "I'm asking you to understand that killing him might not be the victory you think it is." Delphine's sword shook slightly. "You don't get to decide that," she said. Hjalmar's mouth tightened. "No," he agreed. "But neither do you." Esbern looked between them, eyes darting. "If Alduin lives," he whispered, "then the dragons." "The dragons are leaderless," Hjalmar said. "Some will scatter, some will lash out, some may change." Delphine's laugh snapped again. "Change," she echoed. "Dragons don't change." Hjalmar thought of Paarthurnax on his ridge, watching with patient eyes. "Some do," he said. Delphine's sword tip lifted higher. "Then you've chosen them over us," she said, voice trembling. Hjalmar felt something in him settle, heavy as stone. "I've chosen the world over your need for a simple story," he said. Delphine's face went white. For a heartbeat the fury faltered, replaced by something like heartbreak. Then it hardened again into resolve. "You've become a liability," she said. Hjalmar's stomach tightened. "Delphine," he said, and there was a plea in his voice despite himself. "Don't do this." She did not blink. "The blades exist to kill dragons," she said. "If you won't kill the biggest one, then you're standing in our way." Esbern's hands shook so badly the lantern light flickered. "Delphine," he whispered. "He's the Dragonborn." "He's a man," Delphine cut in. "And men make mistakes." Hjalmar took a slow step back, hands still open. "I won't fight you," he said. Delphine's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll die," she said. Hjalmar felt Lydia's absence suddenly, sharply. Wished she were here to put a steady hand on his shoulder. But this was his choice, his burden. He inhaled and let the voice rise just enough to fill his lungs. Not a killing shout. Not a blast meant to break bones. A word meant to stop movement without ending life. Delphine lunged. Hjalmar shouted, and the sound struck her like a wall. It threw her back. Not hard enough to break, but enough to slam her into a stone pillar. Her sword clattered to the floor. Esbern cried out, stumbling forward. Hjalmar lowered his voice, panting. I won't kill you, he said, gaze hard. But I won't let you kill me either. Delphine pushed herself up, face twisted with fury. You think this ends it? She spat. Hjalmar shook his head. No, he said softly. That's the whole point. Endings aren't as easy as you want them to be. He turned away from them, heart heavy. He walked out of Sky Haven Temple with the torchlight at his back and the sound of Delphine's furious breathing echoing in the stone. He did not know if the blades would hunt him. He did not know if the world would curse him. He only knew that he had refused one kind of killing and might be forced into another. Outside, Skyrim's cold air hit his face like a reminder. The living world did not forgive uncertainty. Days that followed did not feel like peace. Skyrim had a way of absorbing catastrophe and turning it into routine. A dragon burned a farmhouse. The next day, someone mended a fence. A man died. The next day, someone poured another drink. Survival had made the province practical. But Hjalmar's choice had not been a catastrophe people could patch with wood and nails. It was a crack in the story, and stories mattered here as much as steel. Rumor traveled faster than horses. In taverns, men said Alduin had been defeated. Others said he had been spared. Some insisted the Dragonborn had made a pact with the World Eater. A priest in Riften declared Hjalmar cursed. A farmer in Dawnstar claimed the aurora had changed color for a night, and that meant the gods were angry. Hjalmar walked through it all like a man carrying a secret too large for his bones. He tried to do what he had always done when fear rose. He went where people were dying and made it stop. That was how he found himself on a muddy road near a village whose name barely mattered. One of a dozen small places clinging to life between mountains and forests. Smoke rose from a burned-out barn. The smell of scorched hay hung heavy in the cold air. Farmers and guards stood clustered near a stone wall, holding torches and pitchforks with the grimness of people who knew their tools were toys against what hunted them. Above, a dragon circled. Not Alduin. Smaller, though still enormous. Its scales caught the dusklight in dull bronze. It moved restlessly, not with the cold purpose of a conqueror, but with the frantic impatience of something without direction. The dragon screamed, a sound that made children in the village cry and grown men flinch. A guard spotted Hjalmar and stumbled forward. "Dragonborn," he called, voice cracking with relief. "Thank the gods." Hjalmar lifted a hand, not in blessing but in warning. "Get them inside," he said. "No." The guard hesitated, then shouted orders, herding villagers toward doors and cellars. Torches bobbed in the gloom. A woman clutched a child to her chest, eyes wide, lips moving in frantic prayer. Hjalmar stood alone in the road, mud sucking at his boots. His hand went to his sword out of habit, then stopped. Killing this dragon would be easy compared to what he had done in Sovngarde. He could shout it down, drive steel through its eye, harvest its soul. The world would applaud. The story would feel satisfying. But it would not change anything. Another dragon would come, leaderless and angry. Another would burn. Another would be slain. A cycle of violence pretending to be solution. The dragon swooped lower, wind blasting down, scattering loose straw and ash. Its eyes fixed on Hjalmar Dort. It roared again, and the sound was not triumphant. It was hungry. Hjalmar lifted his hands and shouted. Not Dragonrend. A different shout, one meant to speak, not to wound. Words of power that carried intent the way a spear carries death. The dragon jerked in the air as the sound struck it, not physically but in mind. Its wings faltered. It hovered, confused, head tilting. Hjalmar shouted again, slower this time, shaping the sound with care. His throat burned, but he held the words steady. He poured meaning into them. Stop. Listen. Remember. The dragon's eyes narrowed. It hissed, circling once more, uncertain. Then it landed on a rocky outcrop near the road with a heavy thud that shook the ground. It stared down at Hjalmar, chest heaving. "You are the one," the dragon rasped, voice thick with disdain and something like desperation. "The one who wounded Alduin." Hjalmar's jaw tightened. "I did," he said. The dragon's lips curled. "He is gone," it spat. "He leaves us without a voice, without a throne." Hjalmar looked up at it. "You don't need a throne," he said. "You need to decide what you are without one." The dragon's laugh was bitter. "We are Dove," it said. "We rule. That is what we are." Hjalmar felt the old anger rise, the anger at arrogance that burned villages and called it nature. He forced it down. Rage would not build anything new. "What if ruling isn't your only truth?" he asked. The dragon's eyes narrowed. "You speak like Parthenax," it sneered. Hjalmar's stomach tightened. "You know him," he said, surprised. The dragon's nostrils flared. "The traitor on the mountain," it hissed. Hjalmar took a slow step forward, careful not to look like prey. "He's changed," he said. "If he can, so can you." The dragon's claws dug into stone. "Change is for mortals," it snarled. Hjalmar lifted his chin. "Then maybe mortals are the ones who endure," he said. "Not because we live forever, but because we learn." The dragon leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You will kill us," it accused. "One by one, until only your voice remains." Hjalmar felt the weight of that truth. He could. The power was there. The world would let him. The blades would cheer. The bards would sing. And nothing would be solved beyond the next fire. "I won't kill you today," Hjalmar said. The dragon froze, as if the words were another shout. "Why?" it hissed. Hjalmar exhaled slowly. "Because I'm tired of ending things and calling it justice," he said. "Because I want something else to be possible." The dragon's gaze flicked, uncertain. Then it laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Possibility," it mocked. A mortal word. Hjalmar held its gaze. "And yet you're listening," he said. For a heartbeat, the dragon looked almost lost. Then it spread its wings, lifting off the rock with a gust that whipped Hjalmar's cloak around his legs. "This is not finished," the dragon snarled as it rose. "We will not be tamed by your mercy." Hjalmar watched it climb into the dusk. "I'm not trying to tame you," he murmured. "I'm trying to keep the world from becoming nothing but ashes." As the dragon vanished into cloud, Hjalmar felt a presence on the ridge beyond. A red shape, distant but unmistakable. Odahviing, watching, silent as judgment. Hjalmar's throat tightened. He did not know if the red dragon watched with contempt or curiosity. Maybe both. He turned and walked toward the village, toward frightened people and burned barns, and the small, relentless work of living. Behind him, the sky rumbled faintly. Not thunder, but something deeper, like time itself shifting in its sleep. Night in Skyrim had always been honest. It hid nothing, because there was nothing to hide behind. The stars were hard and cold. The aurora drifted like ghost fire. The wind carried every sound. Wolves, distant water, a far-off shout from a guard who did not know what he was truly afraid of. Hjalmar walked along a riverbank outside Whiterun, away from the city's walls and its waiting eyes. The river cut through snow and stone, black water flowing steady as if the world's troubles were nothing more than floating debris. His boots left prints in the snow. He watched them fill slowly with drifting flakes. Evidence erased. Time continuing its quiet work. He stopped at a bend where the river widened and slowed. The ice along the edge cracked softly. He crouched and dipped his hand into the water. It was cold enough to bite through leather, sharp and immediate. The pain steadied him. He stared at his reflection in the dark surface. The aurora painted his face green and pale. His eyes looked older than they had weeks ago. Footsteps crunched behind him. Hjalmar turned, hand going to his sword before he could stop himself. Lydia stood a few paces away, cloak wrapped tight, her hair dusted with snow. She held no torch. Her eyes were calm, steady in the cold light. "You're hard to find when you want to be," she said. Hjalmar exhaled. "I didn't want company," he admitted. Lydia stepped closer and crouched beside him, looking down at the river. "You don't get to choose that anymore," she said quietly. "Not with half the holds talking about you like you're a storm." Hjalmar gave a tired snort. "Storms don't have doubts," he said. Lydia's mouth tightened. "Maybe they do," she said. "Maybe that's why they break things." Hjalmar looked up at the sky. A dragon's silhouette passed through a patch of cloud, distant and silent. It did not dive. It did not roar. It simply moved, an enormous shadow crossing the stars. "Every time I see them now," Hjalmar murmured, "I wonder if I should have ended it. Ended him. Made the story simple." Lydia followed his gaze. "And every time you wonder," she said, "you remember why you didn't." Hjalmar swallowed. He did not know if she understood the full shape of it, the visions, the sense of time's river twisting. But she understood enough. He had refused a clean ending, and now he would bleed for it. "Delphine will come," Lydia said, voice low. "And others like her, people who need a villain dead so they can sleep." Hjalmar nodded. "I know. And Ulfric," Lydia added. "We'll use this. He'll say you've gone soft, or worse, that you've sided with dragons. Tullius will say you're unstable. Priests will say you're cursed. Farmers will say you're a hero one day, and a devil the next." Hjalmar stared at the river until his eyes blurred. "Let them," he said finally. Lydia's gaze stayed on him. "That's easy to say now," she murmured. "Harder when the knives come out." Hjalmar's mouth tightened. "I've been stabbed before," he said. "It hurts. Then you live, or you don't." Lydia reached out and placed her gloved hand on his forearm, a small weight that felt like an anchor. "I'm still here," she said. Hjalmar closed his eyes for a moment, letting that simple fact settle. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt too small for what he meant. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the river. The aurora shifted slowly overhead, the green light pulsing like a heartbeat. Hjalmar felt something else under the night, a faint, subtle wrongness, like the sense of a word repeated twice in a sentence, a déjà vu that made his skin prickle. The world's rhythm had changed. He opened his eyes and looked at the water again. For a heartbeat, the reflection did not match him. The face in the river looked older, lined deeper, eyes hollow. Behind that reflection, the sky and the water was not the same. Its aurora a different color, its stars arranged wrong. Hjalmar blinked. The reflection snapped back to normal. He swallowed hard, throat tight. "It's starting," he whispered. Lydia glanced at him. "What is?" Hjalmar stared at the river as if it might answer. "The consequences," he said. "Time. Noticing." Lydia's brow furrowed. "You're scaring me," she said quietly. Hjalmar managed a faint smile that held no humor. "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you awake." A distant roar rolled across the night, too deep to be thunder. It came from far away, from the mountains, from somewhere beyond the edge of sight. Hjalmar's chest tightened. He knew that sound, not as a memory now, but as a presence. Alduin, somewhere outside this moment, outside this season, waiting in whatever place his bound intent had forced him into. Not dead, not gone, waiting. Hjalmar rose slowly, brushing snow from his cloak. The river kept flowing, indifferent. The village fires in the distance twinkled like fragile promises. He looked at the sky one last time, at the aurora's green flame, and felt the weight of the oath he had made without speaking it. He would not be the executioner the world demanded. He would be the warden the world did not understand. He turned toward Whiterun, toward walls and rumors and knives, and Lydia rose with him. Together, they walked back into the living world, leaving the river behind, while somewhere in the cold dark, time shifted and listened, and began quietly to keep score.